Welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. Today is a pretty exciting episode here on the Optimistic Curmudgeon. I want to do a wrap up episode. And today we're going to reflect on the nature of what's been going on with season 8 and look at what exactly we can conclude from a series of conversations about the Re-Enchanting Inklings. I set out at the beginning of this season trying to do something a little bit different. In previous seasons, I've had a group of 7 topics that I want to try and hit each season. And that means my show is usually about leadership, politics, virtue, philosophy, a great books episode, classical education, and so on. But in this case, I want to do something a bit different. I went to the Undiscovered Lewis conference back in September and met so many people doing fascinating work on Lewis that I wanted to see if we could get an entire season's worth of contemplation and reflection out of that. But then it kind of grew beyond just a focus on Lewis. I brought in a friend who was looking at Tolkien, another friend looking at Barfield. And at one point, I had a good lead on another friend who does a lot with Charles Williams. That didn't work out. But by the time this all came together, it really was all about the Re-Enchanting Inklings. Now, what I was hoping that by the time we finished this season, not only would we have done just another season of podcasting, but actually all of these would come together to actually say something. And that's perhaps a high bar, but I hope to convince you by the end of today's conversation that in fact that has occurred. There is immense scholarship happening in the Inklings. I'll share a bit more about that later on today. But I think that amount of scholarship is really indicative of at least 2 truths. First, postmodern literature is dead and deadening. There's not really interesting stuff happening in postmodern literature. Instead, we've got to really get before the 1960s to get to interesting things happening in literature. When you're looking at postmodern literature from the 1960s forward through the early 2020s, mainstream literature is presuming cynicism, and there's just not much joy there. You go back and forth between a cynical deadness towards reality or a pulp approach to writing that is just in terms of generating sales. But if when you go back to the Inklings, this is the second thing that I think this amount of scholarship suggests. What you see are a group of modernist writers who are deeply trying to channel the tradition into their own time. And in doing so, they actually do preserve that tradition in a unique form that's incredibly accessible to us still today. Now, we're coming up on a string of 100-year anniversaries of different works by the Inklings authors. Those will be coming along over the next decade or two. And that really gives us a lot of opportunities to reflect on the meaning of these works, the lives of the authors, and the value that they continue to offer to us today. So when I'm looking back on this season, I really need to begin with a word of gratitude for a bunch of new friends who said yes to podcasting. It continues to amaze me how many people will positively respond to either a random message over Twitter or X, or an email or a conference follow-up, and they're willing to give their time. I don't have any money to pay people for these. I don't yet have the awesome setup that Pints with Jack has, where if you go on an episode, they send you a gift afterwards. There are some great podcasts that do some really cool stuff. My podcast is very much a request for friends to come on the show and let's talk together. And I've had some great people be willing to say yes. So I just want to mention them all. If you've listened through season 8, then hopefully these are familiar names at this point. Most recently, as of recording, we've got Andrew Lazo, as an Episcopalian priest down in Florida. He came on and we had a great conversation about Till We Have Faces. Christiana Hale came on and shared about her article in Life on the Silent Planet, but also from her book, Deeper Heavens. Holly Ordway is a towering figure in Inkling scholarship, and I was just so grateful she was willing to come on and talk about Arthurian literature with me. It was all kinds of fun. Austin Freeman is an incredible Inkling scholar, particularly looking at Tolkien and now moving into Lewis. And if you watch that episode, you may remember Austin's lovely hair. He has got some great hair. He's also got a wonderful sense of humor and is really dedicated to exploring Tolkien's theology with immense fidelity. We also got Annie Crawford coming on. As I'm recording, that episode hasn't published yet. So if you're in the live stream audience, look out for that. Should be dropping tomorrow. But Annie and I had this great conversation about an article she wrote in an unexpected journal several years back, looking at Lewis as an apologist in the Silver Chair. Now, it was personally, I found a very special treat that I got to the Lewis conference and I met one of my heroes, a guy named Brent Weeks. I've been reading his novels for probably, 10, 15 years now. And every one of them just delivers without fail. And he's a wonderful author. And we had a great conversation. And then he agreed to come on the show. So the conversation with Brent was at kind of a deviation from the normal theme. I'll say more about that here in a bit. And then I talked with Dr. Steve Beebe, and that was sort of an opportunity to go back to communication in a way, because I did a history major in undergrad, but I spent 4 years on the forensics team, the competitive speech team, and I was around a lot of communication majors, and I never took any formal communication courses, but I came a little bit conversant in that way of thinking. And listening to Steve talk about Lewis as a communication professor and as a communicator really brought me back to those days. Michael Ward came on the show, and it just blew my mind. He's spoken at my alma mater several times, but then I got to meet him at the Lewis conference, and then he came on to discuss contraception and his essay in Life on the Silent Planet. Now, I can't wait to see what he has coming out next. I'm sure he's got another new book on the horizon. Dr. Sarah Waters came on the show, and we had a delightful conversation all about the connections between C.S. Lewis and William Shakespeare. Landon Loftin and I did our PhD both of us did our PhD degrees at Faulkner University, and we got to know each other over a conference, the Ciceronian Society, a couple years back. And I was so impressed at what he had to say about Owen Barfield that I wanted him to come on the show and talk with me about Owen Barfield. Because I feel very much like a novice, a neophyte talking about Owen Barfield. But this is the guy that Landon has read everything Barfield wrote, and he understands it all, which is really, really impressive. Then, of course, Rhys Laverty was my first guest this season, where Rhys came on. He edited the Davenant Institute's volume of Lewis essays, Life on the Silent Planet. And he really brought an attention and a love of Lewis to the craft of forming that particular volume of essays. But then he took us into particular considerations on the nature of pleasure in C.S. Lewis. Now, in the midst of all of these different guests, there's a variety of different kinds of writing that are represented. We've got some folks who've written monographs. We've got some folks who've written essays that are collected into a book. Others have written sort of what I would call academic adjacent writings. An unexpected journal is not truly an academic journal, but it has a really good wide reach, and it often publishes academics who are not able to publish their work in formal academic journals. So we get this large interest in the Inklings from kind of across the academic and the what I'll just politely try and call normal people who are not obsessed with footnotes. And we all share this love together. So these guests really help me see the breadth of Lewisian scholarship as it stands today. And also note, we had folks who are at the beginning, the middle, and the end stages of their careers in studying Lewis, Tolkien, and Barfield. And in some cases, these folks are bringing decades of reading Lewis and reading about Lewis to their conversations. So in that sense, I think this season has been a great way of gathering together a snapshot of where Lewis studies stand and where Inkling studies stand in the year of our Lord 2025. So I really enjoyed these conversations. I hope that's coming through in today's episode. Now, most of my guests brought a lot of different pieces to this particular puzzle. And I want to make sure I wrote out a list. I want to make sure I didn't skip any of these. Nope. I actually already hit kind of all that and running through their names. So I want to kind of wrap this around to see if what we can say, what exactly do these interviews collectively say? I've thought at several points along the way of trying to dump all of these episodes into a generative AI and turn them into a series of transcripts. I've not done that. I probably won't do that. There seems to be something demonically wrong about that kind of process. But if that were to happen and this were to come out as a book, if I were reviewing the book of all these interviews, what would emerge from that project? When I sit back and look at it after about 13, 14 hours of recording and conversing together about these topics, it seems to me that two truths really emerge. And I want to spend a moment on each of those. Um, the first truth is that the Inklings were deeply attuned to reality, and that attunement comes through in their writings. And when I'm talking about reality, I mean more than just the physical world around us, because that, of course, is something that all of us experience. And it's only through deep training in skeptical philosophy that we forget just how important our senses are. But the Inklings went past that. They really did believe that reality was both transcendent and immanent. They really did believe, Tolkien in writing Mythopoeia really did believe that there were minstrels who sang of things not found in recorded time, and that they could move the heart with stories, and that moving the heart it required moving the mind to perceive that which is greater than the manifest world that we inhabit. Now, Lewis, of course, goes into this whole cosmological imaginary sense, and he's got influences shaping the different Narnia chronicles. But then he also has that go so far in the Ransom trilogy that he literally lays out planetary spirits. He lays out a vision of the solar system as what he calls the fields of Arbol, where each of the planets are hung within the fields. And so space he wants to replace with the heavens. There is a fullness to reality for Owen Barfield. It's not just physical reality or even just spiritual reality. It's a very palpable sense of time and an understanding of time as being present in the very words that we speak. And so, as we learn philology and as we study languages and we understand the nature of human communication over time, we're actually digging deep into the history of human consciousness, as he put it. Now, which means all of that means reality has a thickness to it. And it's a thickness that we can often overlook. But our flourishing as human beings depends on resonating with that reality, of being attuned to it. And the Inklings themselves were attuned to the real. And they took this craft of literature and they infused their writings with reality and with this deep sense that all of creation is infused with the manifest glory of the living God. Now, that attunement to reality comes through their writings, and it brings me to the second thing that I think emerges from this season. So there's something that happens when we continue to dwell in these thoughts. When we continue to read the Inklings, to speak about them, to write on them, when we are inhabiting their ideas, what we're actually doing is pushing back against the intellectual ravages of late modernity. Because you and I have a problem. It's our problem is hopefully well known. Um, Hillsdale College gave me the first framework I used to approach this is that we are the children of the Enlightenment. We sit there with Rene Descartes at times, and we think we're the only ones that exist. We fall prey to solipsism. Cogito ergo sum. I am. I think, therefore I am. I'm the only one that I know that exists. Now, this is the modern condition. We are individual. We are isolated, and we then believe that making ourselves into those individuals is what's actually going to bring us joy. Now, so much of the modern world has shown that that is simply not true. Expressive individualism, as Charles Taylor puts it, doesn't actually bring joy or happiness. What does bring joy and happiness is actually living a life of truth, of living a life that is aligned to reality. If we can do that, then we actually will live happy lives. Well, late modernity has left us first with this Cartesian skepticism, but then further unsure that the rest of the world even really exists. This is where postmodernity goes even further than modernity, where postmodernity asserts that only my individual experience is real and it may not be knowable by anyone else. Now, that's a real problem that we struggle with, I think, in the modern day. We struggle to communicate to each other, to share experiences, to actually know with confidence that the other person is able to experience the world that we experience and to communicate about it in words that both we understand and the other person understands. Well, the Inklings push back against all of that. The Inklings do not agree to any of those tacit positions. They do affirm language. They do affirm the spiritual nature of transcendent reality. They do affirm that we as human beings can access that spiritual nature, that higher sense of the real. And because of that, they, without any of us ever intending it, I think very few people sit down and think, I am personally quite disenchanted today. Let me pull C.S. Lewis off the shelf. Not many people do that. But instead, just reading the Chronicles of Narnia brings our imaginations back into a space where they're re-enchanted. They're reminded about just how deep and good and beautiful reality is. And that ultimately is why that's one of many reasons why the Inklings need to continuously be revived. And of course, since it's June of 2025, I would feel remiss if I didn't point out they need to be revived by the people who actually do understand them. And I'm personally not sure at all that Greta Gerwig really understands the Chronicles of Narnia, but time will tell just how bad her version of The Magician's Nephew is. So, we here in the modern day are for whether we call this a blessing or a curse. We are the descendants of the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution. We are the children of the Romantics, and we are trying to recover a deep sense of reality. And the Inklings show us how to do that, and they give us this working model of studying the tradition, studying the classics, digging deep into the very resources that can revive our souls, and then using the craft of literary stories to link mind to mind and spread that sense of re-enchantment. So if you've been with me through this whole season, thank you so much for sticking it out. It's been a delightful season here on the Optimistic Curmudgeon. If you're just tuning in to this episode, let me encourage you to find our YouTube channel, The Optimistic Curmudgeon. And you've got 12 prior episodes in this season that you can check out and get caught up on what exactly this conversation is. So what I hope we conclude from all this is that the Inklings remind us that the world is meaningful and our lives in it are part of the great story that God himself is telling. So thank you for joining me here on this wrap-up episode. This is it. This is the last recording that I'll do and release until we resume in September. I am personally very excited about summer break. We'll be back in September with a normal season, so a normal round of politics and culture and education and philosophy and all kinds of good things happening. Well, if you're still here, let me give you my two quick announcements. And if anybody's got questions, put a comment in the chat box, and I will gladly take those. But if not, I'll just give you my announcements and draw this to a close. Announcement number one. If you've been tracking my show for a while, you're probably aware that back in 2023, I defended my dissertation. That dissertation then was called something like An Antidote to Modernism, C.S. Lewis and Gender. It's actually coming out now with Davenant Press in a much better title. That title is Sons of Adam, Daughters of Eve, C.S. Lewis's Images of Gender. Sometime in July, I should have pre-release details out, and the book should be available for ordering in August. So if you follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or X, I'll have details out on all of my accounts as soon as those are available. Secondly, if you're not aware that this exists and are of the academic inclination, you should know about this one. The McGrath Center at the University of Notre Dame has an Inklings Fellowship project that they run. This is their second year running, where they offer grants to professors who will put together Inklings-themed classes. I missed the deadline for that last year, but I'm very excited to announce that I am at least putting in an application for that this year. I'm going to try and we're going to write, record, and publish a free online class on the Chronicles of Narnia. So if you've enjoyed the kinds of commentary you've seen on this season, you'll want to check that class out. And so all of that we'll have recorded lectures, we'll have suggested readings. All of that will be available through the Thales College website. So once details are available there, of course, I'll share those on my platform. Thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us here today on the Optimistic Curmudgeon. My name is Josh Herring. I'll be back in the fall with season 9. So until next season, seek the good, live the true, and enjoy the beautiful.